Welcome to the Future of Learning, where innovation meets education. I am here today with Christie Orr, recruitment specialist from ANZUK Education. Welcome, Christie. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, thanks. I'm good. Thanks for having me.
No worries. So today we're going to talk a little bit about recruitment. We're going to give a few tips for teachers who are looking at the next step in their career, perhaps, or they're looking at moving abroad to teach. Before we get started with that, can you please tell us a little bit about your career path? How did you end up working in recruitment, and what education sector do you recruit for specifically, and why ANZUK?
Yeah, cool. Yeah, no, so I was actually a teacher myself previously. I actually had a bit of a interesting journey into teaching. So I started, I'm from New Zealand myself, so Auckland, and started actually with a sport and recreation degree. Um, Sort of got into that, just being passionate about, sports and that, but picked up a business degree whilst I did it. So I didn't want to go down the personal training route. And as I was actually doing practicums and stuff for the sports side with business, was doing part-time coaching kids, and that's kind of what led me into going back to uni for a third degree to do my master's in primary teaching. And then I taught in New Zealand for just about 5 years. Sort of had, and funnily enough, it kind of all links together, so I'm not rambling too much. But when I was doing my sport degree, I went over to Germany. I did an exchange there with a sport university in Cologne, and that kind of sparked a love for travel. So when I came back and I was teaching, teaching is a job that you can do anywhere in the world, everywhere needs teachers kind of thing. So it was like, great, going to be teaching, can travel with this. And sort of when I got to that 5-year mark, was ready to make a move, and went over to London with the intention of teaching. And kind of whilst I was there, sort of just fell into from speaking to agencies, because over in UK it's pretty different. So with working in any school in the UK, London particularly, you'll probably always need to go through an agency. And just kind of from speaking to consultants over that, role came up and I fell into education recruitment. So I did that there for 2 years, and then had also fallen in love with Australia because I did a little stint for 6 months, taught here in Australia too, and so came back and joined ANZUK, and so doing the same sort of recruitment role, still got that foot in education, because I always love having something to do with the kids, and that. So that's sort of how I've ended up where I am now. In terms of what I'm doing now specifically with ANZUK is, so I'm in the Queensland office. So ANZUK was established about over 20 years ago, started in Victoria. So down in Victoria there, particularly Melbourne, really established, so in terms of helping teachers with permanent roles, contract, CRT, casual teaching, all of that in New South Wales. We've only really been in Queensland since last year, and also in Perth. So we're still in the growth stage here, working predominantly in secondary schools. So we've also got early childhood teams. We've got that side of it as well. But for what I do, working just with secondary schools. But I suppose the beauty of ANZUK is it's got that connection with the UK as well, obviously, given ANZUK. And then we do have sister companies in US, New Zealand, and they've ventured out further into Wales and things as well. So being able to get kind of worldwide with it too. But that's pretty much how I got here and where I'm at now. So yeah, that's
What an
me.
interesting journey. What an interesting
Yeah,
journey, because
it
you
was pretty
started
wild.
in recreation and sports,
Yeah,
and then business, and then to move on to teaching, which I
yeah.
feel like that part is quite, you
It
can
is pretty
connect it.
significant, probably, how I ended up where I did, because I think particularly with ending up in education recruitment, because it ties in what I did with that business degree, but then with the education side as well. So it was like a nice little harmony where I can actually utilize the skills from all my degrees into what I'm doing now. So I think that's what I sort of like most about where I'm at, or where I've gotten to.
You're a true lifelong learner. Something
Exactly.
that
Yeah.
something that gets thrown a lot in around the education
Yeah, it's a buzzword.
environment, lifelong learner, which is funnily enough, like there's a lot of uh, skills that are interrelatable there among the different careers. Like teachers can be recruiters because a lot of the same skills apply, especially if you're recruiting for education.
Yeah,
And vice versa, like if you go a recruiter, you need to be able to like talk to people and
yeah,
understand their needs. So then, like if you transfer back into the classroom, that also
yeah.
translates same skills. So
Yeah,
it's a beauty of
massively.
that.
And teachers, yeah, certainly do have so many transferable skills. Yeah, within education, like a teacher, I feel like has so many different hats on all the time. Um, you don't only know like curriculum, but you've also got your pastoral hat on, you're communicating with colleagues, trying to plan with everyone's, different ideas and all that kind of thing, and management of people. Like you're essentially doing HR with your kids anyway.
Yeah, sometimes I love when people say, "Oh, you're a man, you can multitask," and I'm like, "I'm a teacher, I can do the role while saying goodbye to someone, while talking to a kid about the problem that they have in the playground, while giving someone
Yeah.
else a tissue, while controlling the rest
Yeah.
of the class." Like
Whilst
teachers
you're probably
are
still thinking about your lesson
amazing.
that you're going to plan after lunch.
Yeah, so teachers are amazing at multitasking,
Yeah,
and I think
100%.
one of the beauties about and ANZUK. I said ANZUK, but it's ANZUK, right? So is that how you
Yeah,
guys
so it
say it?
does
Was that?
stand for Australia, New Zealand, UK, because I
Yep.
think that's where obviously started in Australia. New Zealand's always going to be there. Australia, where
We're
it's
part of
the star.
it.
Yeah, exactly. And then they moved over into the UK, so that's kind of where it all gelled together. But yeah, certainly spreading across the globe, which is quite exciting, particularly for a lot of Kiwis. There's that dream of you go do your stint in the UK, but then the other one of it is Canada, and so we've in there now is like North America and that. So yeah, it's quite exciting, but I don't think we can add on any more letters. So
Yeah, it'll become a mouthful.
yeah,
And like you said before, like teaching's well, to me, teaching is one of the most rewarding job that you can have. Very difficult, very challenging, but very rewarding. And you just touched on all the countries that you guys work across and the fact that globalization, you can pretty much be a teacher in any part of the world. Like, yes, you'll have to get your head around the curriculum, and some schools might do things differently. In fact, most schools do things the same thing very different, but still at the core, the job is the same. So once you're a
yeah,
teacher somewhere, you can probably end up working somewhere else. So um, is that a big part of what you do, like employing teachers from overseas into Australia? I assume a
yeah.
lot of people from the UK coming over for the weather, same people from New Zealand, or perhaps going to the UK for the first role abroad. Is that something
Yeah.
that you specialize on?
Yeah, so essentially that's probably our most like unique specialization as well, is being able to have that international pipeline. So not only supporting educators, particularly who want to come to Australia, and that's probably where I sit in my role is, teachers who are coming from overseas and wanting to work in Queensland, and that's, where I support. And then, if they're wanting to go to Victoria, there's a team down there, supports down there. And then we've got our global recruitment consultants as well who can help people with figuring out how they make that move kind of in the beginning stage of it, or Aussies or Kiwis heading over to the UK and that. And like I say, like I was a teacher myself, like I've had that experience of actually speaking to ANZUK when I was teaching in Australia and wanting to head over to London. So kind of when you've got like it's a big move, you've got a lot of questions, you don't know how it works. So there's the experts that their role is to be able to support making that move. And also then it makes it seamless as well, because then you can move straight over to the team who's already on ground in London, be able to help you with that, and vice versa. You could be speaking to the team in the UK, and then they'll be able to be part of it. So I know we're going to be passed over to us for us to be able to help support there. And same with New Zealand. So we've got our team on ground there. Often chat to the Kiwis looking to move to Australia, particularly. And yeah, we know Kiwis like Queensland. And then, and then obviously we're able to get in touch and help them out, whether that be, helping teachers have jobs come into on their arrival or when they're here, if they're sort of finding their feet and things, and then helping them along the way.
Yeah, and I mean, when you move in countries, there's a lot of things to think about, and it's a lot of admin. So being in touch with a recruitment agency can help you streamline part of the process, so you don't have to sort of see it online looking at jobs all the time, what's come
Yeah, or
up. So
talking to a
you can
million
sort of,
different people about different things and just trying to wrap your head around it as well.
yeah, it's very helpful. So, okay, so I'm a teacher and I'm looking for a job. Yes, globalization is great because I can apply for jobs in different parts of the world. However, that makes it more competitive because other people from other parts of the world are also applying now
Mm.
in my same area. So, as a teacher or any teacher out there looking for a job, um, what do they need to have in their resumes and the cover letters to stand out in a
Mm.
very competitive applicant pool?
Yeah.
And what are some things that they should highlight?
Yeah, well, probably the first thing with when you're, especially if you're looking to make a move internationally or even in Australia, states to state. First of all, like internationally, you've obviously got to have your working rights in that country. So, if you're heading over to the UK, you've got to know what visa you're on. Likewise, global educators coming here need to have their, visa that's going to allow them full working rights. So where, there's obviously visa agents and things and immigration and things that you can go to ask about visas and that. So that would obviously be a first thing to be able to know that you can legally work in whichever country you're planning to go to. And then in terms of when you decide where you need to go, looking at in terms of the governing bodies and things, if it's so states in Australia, if we sort of just think about Australia, each of the territories here have their different educational bodies, so they'll have a different registration that you'd need to know that your qualification in your home country can translate to. So for New Zealand teachers, for example, you've got your full registration with the Ministry of Education. For Queensland, it's great. We've got a mutual recognition so that you can apply for QCT through that. In Victoria, they've got different governing bodies, so you just need to be looking into, what they are, how you apply for them, and making sure that your qualification can be recognised and to be able to, so that you're going to obviously be able to teach in your capacity, be paid in your capacity as well as a teacher with your experience. I know for over in the UK, you can get qualified teacher status. And yeah, so it's definitely looking at those things first. And then, say you've got all that and you're good to go. It can be, yeah, certainly quite competitive in some places, and particularly Queensland compared to the rest, and, still in that growth stage. So in terms of your CV, it does come down to the basics first and foremost of you want that, formatted properly, clear, easy to read. Like if, a school's going to pick up a CV and it's got a spelling mistake, they'll put it straight down. So,
What is the current trend for CVs in the education sector? Because when I was at uni and about to finish my degree, they told me that I had to have all this very visual kind of CV that is quite different from every other industry, with photos, images, color, 5 pages long,
yeah.
quotes. Is that still the norm, or are we going to a more, like you said, more basic, standard, have the simple stuff there, easy to read?
It's
What?
really interesting because I did actually notice that the most in the UK. When New Zealand teacher CVs came through, they were almost the most exciting to look at. So they were always the bright ones. There's the photo, there's the pictures, and they were like compared to the others, which were more, yeah, very much stock standard, your Times New Roman kind of
my
thing.
first
But,
my first teaching CV in New Zealand was about 7 pages long.
oh
I was like,
yeah,
who
no,
does
you
that?
want to
Like,
condense that down.
they had photos, they had like arty things. I'm like the least arty person, but it had art everywhere.
Yeah,
So
no, I
I was
think I
like,
had
is
some
that too
flowers on
much?
mine. It was all pink and yeah, no, it was funny just like you pointing that out because yeah, I do remember it would always be like, oh yeah, this is gonna be a New Zealand teacher because they've got the nice bright CV. Yeah, I mean it's certainly not about doesn't necessarily have to be that. Sometimes it is actually quite good to have a photo on your CV because sometimes that does it's nice for someone to know who's actually on that paper. But I think the main things are to have a really clear career summary, so that, all your dates are actually lining up, what you've been doing for those, however many years. Because obviously if there's any career breaks in that, if that's not clear, that can be a bit of a red flag. Obviously you'd need to show up there what your qualifications are. And then in terms of like the information you'd have, I do know it is good to have a personal summary, and that doesn't need to be long, like, a real succinct thing, sort of a little bit about who you are. If you can highlight the why you teach and your passion within a CV, that's brilliant. And then particularly in terms of what you'd have under your roles, it's I think in a CV it's not so much about what you did, but what you achieved. So, really highlighting the impact that you had in that role, as opposed to, I taught this class in these subjects. It can be really great to actually highlight specific, achievements that, kids might have made, or particular, if you had any kind of, coordinated some kind of program, and what that did and why. Obviously succinct. You really don't want a CV to be probably more than like 2 pages, 3 max.
Yeah, so can we give an example of how a teacher can highlight the success they had in a role? Because sometimes I feel like it can be very difficult if you're just in the classroom and you are teaching in the classroom all day. Let's say you teach year 5 and that's your class, and you really want to make a move in your career or step up. How do you highlight the impact that you had in your class as a teacher when you haven't had that opportunity? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I was a year 5 teacher actually, funnily enough. So
perfect. How will you highlight your success?
Should I get it out? We'll do a little review. No, I mean, I can't even remember what mine looks like, but yeah, no, good question. I suppose in that, you could look at you would almost look at the co-curricular things that you might have done in that role, particularly primary teaching. Like, it is probably secondary and primary is quite a different game, because primary, you are the main classroom teacher and you're doing all the subjects, and you're dealing with all of the pastoral and their wellbeing and a number of different needs in a classroom. That differentiation. Obviously secondary teaching, you've got your subject and you've kind of got your more set curriculum where you're kind of working towards, whatever the exam may be, whether they're high school certificate or NCEA. And so with that, it's more what's the word, the summative kind of where you can actually put a figure on what the achievement or what the results were, or where they were at the start of the year to what they were after you finished with them. It's much harder to do that in primary school, but you can probably highlight those things that you've done. So if you have implemented some sort of writing program that's then improved their EASTIL scores, or you could almost have links to things you've done, if it's a digital CV going through. But yeah, you really want to be able to, it's going to be old school piece of paper, but yeah, I would say like any impact that you could have made, and probably it is going to come from those extra things you've done behind the scenes of, you've planned a whole unit. So say you've planned a unit on rockets, and the kids have gone on that field trip, or they've actually been able to bring in physics into it at year 5 level, sort of thing. So yeah, probably focusing on the things you've done as a whole, like in the behind the scenes of the planning. So yeah, units you've planned and implemented, programs that you've done, or even assessments that you've brought in to be able to narrow down or get a better picture of where a child is at, or something that's helped them assess their own. It is interesting because, like, sort of speaking of all that, it is a very different country to country as well. So I do know, as I've taught now in New Zealand, Australia, and the UK, and all very different. So in New Zealand, you almost have a bit more autonomy as a teacher to be able to bring in those things and work them with the curriculum. In Australia, there is a bit more, red tape. You probably are working more towards units and things that are already outlined, and that's very much the same in the UK, where you would have subjects or lessons that you do need to teach, and there's not much more you can do with
We
that.
will
And
really,
that's just primary
yeah,
school, but
yeah. That's very interesting. I have also noticed the same.
yeah,
In terms of what are schools looking for from teachers in terms of professional development? So obviously you have your years experience. What are they looking for in a CV? What do they want the teachers to be doing? Courses, are they seeking their own courses? Are they engaging in professional development of their own?
mm,
It's just their professional development from the schools. What kind of things are appealing for leadership when they're looking at
yeah,
CVs from candidates?
yeah. I think kind of flipping now to the secondary side, if you've got your subject specialization, that's sort of, your main thing, it would be, your professional development that you're doing within that. So I know that for most of the subjects, there's usually is a some sort of association. So whether that's like the Maths Teachers Association, and they'll often put on conferences, events and things, or professional learning, could be even webinars, and then so you're constantly upskilling with, new trends or anything else that is coming, into within your subject to, I suppose, develop your expertise within that. But I think even if it's professional development that's not just given to you by the school, that you're going out and actually seeking professional development to develop your own expertise, that's actually, says a lot for itself, that you're someone who's motivated, you actually want to learn more, you want to be better, and you want to bring that into your classroom, is certainly going to highlight, I suppose, your motivation, the type of person, type of teacher that you
Leader.
are, that you actually want to constantly get better for your children or bring new things in, and also staying up with whatever is changing within curriculum, within your subjects, and within education.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, that's quite valuable, and I think like you always recommend it. But one of the hardest things for teachers is always I don't have time to go and do more.
100%. Yeah,
But it is very important that teachers do seek that because it's going to be seen better,
yeah.
especially if you want to sort of
Yeah,
step
and I
up
mean,
in your
it's
career.
always, there could be the potential of, if you're in communications with leadership at your school, of speaking to about, say, you're working in a middle leadership position within your subject area, and taking that to see if you can have that release time for, to upskill, and that if there was, say, a conference or a webinar in an afternoon, can it be somehow using, part of your CRT or release time in a skill to be able to use as, your curriculum development.
Look,
Where there can always be
yeah,
those opportunities, I think, of, being able to maybe talk with your school to
yeah,
see if, there could be time allocated, if it's, I think, if especially if you're maybe in one of those head of department positions, and it is going to be something that's going to benefit your whole faculty. And like I say, you can be joined to those associations where, they might have things like conferences and that on, and you just want to spend time either, reflecting on that or implementing something you may have learned to bring in. Yeah, yeah.
cool. So my next question is around, with the education landscape always evolving, what are some of the top skills that schools are looking for?
Yeah. I think with teachers, as you would know, it's certainly an adaptable job, where, like we've already sort of touched on, you're going to wear multiple hats. So I think it can be, in some ways you probably do want to be a teacher that can, be flexible in situations. You're always going to have to kind of do things on the fly half the time. So if you kind of too in the box of, this is how things have always been done, and kind of just spinning the cog on the same wheel, I don't know that that can really work well with the way that education is and is going. So certainly I think being able to be adaptable in situations, because you can plan a lesson and something happens in the corner with your kids, or something might be going on at home, and that's going to completely flip the rest of your day, the rest of your lesson. So obviously that adaptability in terms of a skill would be something that certainly teachers, or schools, be looking for in a teacher. In terms of subject specific of where that may be, what subjects kind of, it does change. You will see sometimes the shortages in things like the sciences, particularly those senior sciences like biology and physics. And then, but then some days it is your classics, your food technology teachers. That's where the shortage is. So those real niche subjects that you don't. So it does depend on the school and the landscape and whichever, wherever the school is. Particularly in Australia, it's been interesting because that's, you've got your regional schools as well, where what they need can be completely different to something in a metropolitan city like Melbourne would need, or what their shortages are. Obviously, with the way the world's going, and in terms of technology, and I mean, I want to say 21st century, but I'm almost like, because it's still the 21st century. It's going to be like the 22nd or something soon. But your STEM subjects, so your science, your technology, your engineering, your maths, and sort of we were having a brief conversation before about AI and how that fits into the scheme of things, because I suppose as an educator, we were always wanting to teach children to be, citizens, future citizens of the world. And so it's understanding kind of where, what jobs they're going to have when they're leaving school, and being able to equip them to be able to do those jobs. So, sometimes those more traditional things that we might have been taught, or our parents might have been taught in school, isn't really going to stick anymore, or not benefit them, or give them the skills that they need in the jobs that they're going to have in 20 years' time.
Yeah, so, and I guess that's a huge shortage in that area, because all the teachers who have already been teaching, I don't know, for 10 plus years, well, they didn't learn that. So they have to actively seek that. So
they've got to learn it themselves as well, which can sometimes be a bit of a...
Yeah,
they're wanting to teach, right. Not learn sometimes.
That's right. So it's like, oh my God, I have to go back to relearn all this to be pretty much on par with some of the kids that I'm teaching. So it's just a very catch-22 situation. And then that's why it's a high need for the technology and robotics and coding and all these areas. So it's definitely something that every young teacher out there should be looking at.
I think, and it was always something that I think when I was a teacher as well, that was super important to me, was always kind of nurturing that creativity in your students. So you're really getting them to be able to think out, like problem solve. And I suppose that's where a lot of inquiry learning and that comes from as well, where, they can actually think outside of their box to think of new ways to do new things. Because at the end of the day, they probably are going to be doing new things in new ways when, when they're leaving school and in their own jobs. So.
Yeah, that's right. So now we've presented our CV. We look good. The school is interested in interviewing. What are some of the most common interview questions that teachers can expect when applying or when being interviewed for a teaching position?
Yeah, so they'll always... you can probably always expect to go into an interview and the first thing they're going to ask is, why did you become a teacher, or what's your journey been? That probably entwined with why do you want to teach here or at this school. So you always want to, I suppose, know your own journey. It's always kind of being able to show your passion. At the end of the day, teaching is a job that it's really you've got to have the passion for it.
We're not doing it for the money? Should have told me that.
So really, they'll be looking to see if they can see your passion and your engagement. And then certainly you'd want to know your CV back to front. So that's where, it wouldn't have been a good idea to run your CV through ChatGPT, because if they pull up anything that you don't know, it's not going to go great. That always, first and foremost, kind of ask you probably like, why'd you become a teacher? Or tell us about your teaching journey, or, it could be why science, like what's your passion there, a little bit. They want to know a little bit about you. Very much probably want to know why the school, because they'll want to see if there's an alignment there. So it's always, good to have done your research on the school and actually know why, you would be a good fit there. What we like to do as well when we've got someone would always offer an interview preparation session to be able to chat through whether that be actually doing talking through questions you may be asked, or even just having a chat so that you feel comfortable going into an interview, because we all know that can be daunting sometimes,
especially if you have an interview for a long time. It's really important to prepare before the next one, because sometimes you can just feel like, or they ask you a question and you don't know how to answer it, and then you go sweaty palms, your mouth's dry. Someone gave me an advice once. I know you're the expert here, but to always take water with you. So if they ask you a challenging question that you don't know how to answer, you can always just drink water while you think. And that gives a little bit of time.
It gives you a bit of time
to sort of to like prepare the answer
think
before.
Time's never a bad sign. I mean, you don't want to be sitting there for 5 minutes, but we even, as a teacher, you gave that to the kids. You'd ask a question on the mat, and then you would give them that think time before you're expecting them to put their hand up straight away. So, but I'd want to know that background, and then probably questions that. What's always good to think about is having examples of. We talked about trying to highlight those impacts and things in your CV, particularly if you've gone through to the interview stage. If you've not been able to highlight in your CV, there might have been something that you've done that you really made a difference on a child, and it could be something more with that they had been really struggling in a particular area, and you did these certain things or certain steps that you then had that light bulb moment with them, or they had that light bulb moment where it all just clicked. So kind of having those scenario ideas of, where you have made a positive impact, but some schools will often ask, they might ask your strengths, but they can also ask where are your flaws, or, what are your weaknesses as a teacher and things that you want to learn on. So whilst always, obviously, I think people can go into an interview always thinking about wanting to, you obviously are going to be talking yourself up and highlighting all of those positive things, but also it could be looking at, can they self-reflect and know what they want to work on to grow, or what their ambitions are? Another good question that can often come up is your line manager is going to be walking past your classroom. What are they going to see? What are they going to think? Or what are they going to hear? And in your head as a teacher, what does your classroom look like? What does it sound like? And that can tell you a lot about a teacher. They then say, oh, you won't hear a child say a word. They'll be, silent, good little soldiers, like doing their work. Can sometimes, for a school, that might not be what they want to hear. They might want to hear that it would be a little bit noisy, because there'd be conversation of children collaborating with each other on a task that they've been given.
I think in your head, everyone will be thinking chaos. They will see chaos.
Organised chaos.
Probably organised chaos.
So definitely having some schools they can catch you off guard, but there will be those stock standard questions, and it's always good to be able to answer with an example. A real life example is always good. So kind of thinking about your experience and what you've done, and if you're a graduate teacher, that can be things from your practicum, your practicum experience, and impacts you've made there. Certainly. Also looking at it with the lens of actually where can I grow, or what do I need to work on. And then obviously having done your research, you don't sort of want to be caught out with that. So those would probably be my top tips there. And then always having the 3 words of how you describe yourself on the tip of your tongue. Because that'll always catch you. You can usually think of one, and then it's like,
I think it's one of the hardest things to answer, is that question, and also the tell me about yourself. So they usually might come at the start of the interview. So be prepared for those. Now tell me about yourself. Well, I don't really know. So really having that answer that comes and flows really does help.
And you also want to be, obviously you want to be able to give enough information without, you also want to keep it succinct. So you want to be able to get to the point of what you're saying with enough detail, but that you're not sort of, talking in 10 minutes later and kind of like, okay.
You're still going.
Okay, we I don't know. That's the point, But, those would probably be a couple of hot tips. I did just have another one come into my mind, but it's fallen out. I'll see if I think of it later.
Don't worry, we got the job. So the school gave us a call saying that, or gave the recruiter a call to say that we got the job. So we're all happy. However, now, especially for teachers moving from one country to another, how can teachers negotiate their salary? We know that there's not a lot of room for negotiation in salary in schools and in education in general. But are there any strategies that teachers can apply to perhaps get in a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, that one is probably more difficult. So I suppose, because like you said, there is probably more of that red tape where schools, especially if they're in by the, their governing body, or they'll have their sort of pay brackets of what they're aligned to. So it isn't sort of as much one of those jobs as, a more corporate might be, where you've got that room for negotiation. Will generally be based on your experience in there. Obviously, having other qualifications and things. If you have done, those postgraduates within education, and then that's going to be benefiting, what you're bringing to the table in the school and in your role. Because really, I mean, I suppose in teaching, the only ways that you do go up is when you take on any additional roles or additional leadership. And that can be in the capacity of it might be mentoring other teachers, or it is coordinating certain subjects and things. Yeah, so it is certainly more difficult, and it does change country to country as well. And I mean, I do know in New Zealand, you're probably going to get to a point where it's actually that's it, and you can't go any further. So yeah, I mean, some schools can be different as well, but particularly with in public school systems in almost all the countries, there's going to be that red tape where the only way that you really can increase any salary is by taking on those additional leadership positions.
Responsibilities.
Yeah, and responsibilities.
So
But I suppose once you're in a school and if you're doing things and you're showing your worth in that sense, obviously that then opens the doors up for those additional responsibilities. You never know what can come of that.
Yeah, I find that teaching is one of those jobs or careers where you first get the job, and once they get to know you, and if you fit in the community and you create that bond and relationships with the kids, things can move very fast.
Yeah.
But you first need to get to the school before you get given that responsibility.
Yeah.
But so you talked about the public sector, private schools. Is there usually a bit more room in private schools for, I don't know, perhaps someone moving over from the UK to Australia?
Again, they're still probably going to be looking at how many years you've been teaching and what your qualifications are for what that, can translate to. They're often tied with their own red tape of what they can do there as well. But I suppose, when it does come to the money and that, it also comes back to, it is different to other jobs. And, most people, don't, at the end of the day, we know as we're not going to getting into teaching for that.
You heard it here first. You heard it here first, folks. If you want more money, get outside hustle.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Awesome. No, thank you. I think that's really helpful for anyone out there looking at boosting the career or moving countries or applying for a new job.
Yeah. And I mean, if you're going to go move country, like it's the experience in itself as well that you get. And then if you then go back home eventually, or wherever you're from, like what value you can actually bring from your experience in another curriculum and another school. I think it just constantly adds to your experience, and it might not be reflected monetarily, but it's going to be reflected on the impact that you can have on the students and the school.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're changing countries, you probably don't want to be slammed with too much responsibility, because you're probably more focused on exploring that new country as well and getting to know the culture. So I think it can also be really good. So just to sort of wrap up the conversation, Christie, from your point of view, and I think we probably touched on this earlier, what are some of the emerging trends in education that, from talking to perhaps principals, that you see coming up that teachers need to be aware of so they can stay ahead of the curve?
Ooh, that is a good question. I suppose, kind of like what we had touched on is, going to be all of those advances in technology. And I think there's almost the managing that with your students, because the way that what their childhood or teenagehood is growing up is probably a lot different. The generational shift seems to be a lot faster now, where it can be so vastly different to what you as a teacher may have experienced going up through school. So being, so you're not really probably going to teach an experience like what you were taught. So really knowing what you sort of, again, I suppose it's future thinking. Future of education.
The
But
future of learning. That's what
future
we're
of
here
learning,
for.
future of learning. But yeah, probably being able to roll with the punches, I guess, with that, and how you can incorporate that into teaching, and understanding where the children are and the life that they're living or what's going on in their current world, and being able to adapt your teaching with that. Whether that is things of AI, but it's also managing, not just academically, but, there are a lot of changes in being an emotional changes of children, particularly in schools now after COVID and a global pandemic, and all of that. And so you've kind of got the backwind of that where, they've had 2 years out of school, some of them, and even though it's been, 2 years now since we've had that, we're actually still needing to work
Still seeing the
through
effects.
all of the effects that had, and probably particularly now 2 years after it are seeing where those effects are, because even students in year 10 probably aren't going to be the same as where students in year 10 were pre-pandemic.
Pre-pandemic, yeah.
So I think it's, that really being able to be adaptable, and touch wood, but we're not going to go into a number pandemic, but at the end of the day, how adaptable and flexible were teachers when that happened to be able to still give students education, when the world did go into lockdown. And, so you've got that adaptability side of it. And then again, thinking about at the end of the day, these kids probably will be doing a lot of jobs that are going to be very much jobs that we have no idea what that could even look like or involve. Probably not going to be checkout operators at the supermarket, because there's already computers doing that. So
I walked up past the supermarket aisle the other day, and there was this little robot. Have you seen them yet?
No.
Where they scan everything that's in the aisle, and I was like, "Oh my lord, this is it!" Like they don't even need people. Yeah, it's quite scary. But like you said, these are the jobs that we need to get. There won't be people refilling the shelves in the supermarket, but there will be people fixing the robots that refill the shelves. So we need to get them ready for those kind of things.
And then you've got all those skills that we didn't have curriculums for. Some places still don't, and even, like I say, we weren't taught coding when we were in school. Kids are going to need to know coding to probably do any job that they're going to have in 10 years' time. Yeah, so all of those things. And then I think also, kind of like I touched on earlier, is being able to nurture those problem solvers and those innovative thinkers, because they're going to need that to be able to stay ahead. Because like you say, if robots are going in and taking all the jobs, they're going to need to be able to stand themselves out, and have those skills to obviously be able to live a life, whatever that may be, in 10, 30, 20 years' time.
Yeah, amazing. Christie, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. It's really insightful. For any teachers out there who are wanting to either change of countries, change of schools, look at teaching opportunities out there, they can get in touch using the links that we're going to put in the description of the episode. Are there any other ways, your guys' website as well?
Yeah. So definitely jump on our website. And like I say, sort of wherever you might be interested in, whether that is going, if you're already in Australia and want to looking at moving states, if you're in New Zealand wanting to come to Oz, if you're in Oz or New Zealand wanting to go to the UK, you can certainly jump into the website and be pointed in the right directions. I'm going to be able to help you out.
Thank you very much.
Oh, all good.
See you, Kristen.
See ya.